my favorite. Far off places,
Daring sword fights, magic spells, a prince in disguise.
If you like it all
Come
that
on,
much,
we've all
it's...
been there. We've all thought the wonder of magical worlds and dreamed about what our life would be like as kings, queens, royal lieges, what great mythological tales would engulf us next. That's what makes these fantasy worlds so enticing for us. From J.R.R. Tolkien's brilliantly crafted Lord of the Rings to George R.R. Martin's viral Game of Thrones series, the fantasy genre has enthralled many storygoers across the years. A huge part of this trend is our ability to impose ourselves in the story. A lot, and I mean like a lot, of movies love to take this premise of throwing like relatable, like normal characters, whatever that means, into some world that they can barely understand, commonly fantasy worlds. Many different companies have taken their shot into this genre, but the earliest and most popular example of it, in film and animation at least, is Disney. Their first full length animated film was Snow White, and to this day, Disney is still quite the purveyor of the fantasy genre in both film and TV. They've gone as far to release new films and stories for their streaming service, Disney Plus, and last year they aired a new TV series on Disney Channel, The Owl House. The premise of this show is much like any other in the genre. A normal human in a seemingly normal life gets sucked away into a fantasy world beyond their imagination, full of magic and lore and history. But the show has one major difference that doesn't really get played into by its counterparts. Our protagonist isn't a part of this world. Any of it. In fantasy stories, we see the hero become the greatest wielder of powerful arts, a brilliant swordsman like none before them, a pivotal point in the plot, and perhaps the most magnificent being of all those around them. But the Owl House plays into just how unrealistic that standard is. Why would a typical human be able to master the ways of a world better than those who are already accustomed to it? And that is exactly what we'll be discussing. Today, let's talk about how Luz's magic will change the Boiling Isles. To make this as easy as possible, I'm going to break this down into three parts. The first part is the canon, anything and everything we could scrap together from the show on how the world works. In the second part, I'll include any inferences or speculation that can be made about the world or any logical connections that fit before going into predictions and theories for season 2 or anything beyond it at part 3. Anything past this point can and should be considered a spoiler. So if you've not finished the series, I definitely recommend it. It's really a great show, and season 2 comes out very, very soon.
Team Owl House rules supreme!
Yes, still got it. Still got the skills that pay the bills.
Let's begin with the canon. Anything and everything we know. We could chunk the canon into two sections: the Boiling Isles and witches, more specifically Luz. For the former, we'll be looking at this very familiar exposition King's character gives us in Young Blood, Old Souls.
The Boiling Isles, born from the flesh and bones of a fallen titan. This original magic was so potent, all life on the Isles evolved to wield magic too. For years we explored those powers freely. Until a mysterious witch appeared who declared that he, and he alone, could speak to the island. He said that we were using magic all wrong. His teachings took hold, his strength grew, and he became Emperor Belos.
Now, I must say, I absolutely love the design choice to save the exposition of the history of the island for like the end. It's at the end of the season because now it serves as like a recap of everything we've learned, but it's also like we get to learn everything fresh during the series alongside Luz. It makes the mystique even more wonderful. Anyway, that's aside from the point. I digress. An important thing to take note of from this tale: magic is not some naturally occurring part of this world. It is a gift from the Titan, or the Titan's corpse more specifically. All magic was originally something raw that existed because of the Titan's presence. Now, the magic here is very similar to other magic systems, now that the Titan has granted it to them. In the terms of Boiling Isles, magic is harnessed by the witches who can use it. Think of it sort of like the Force from Star Wars, or like arcane magic in D&D, if you're familiar with either of those. It's an essence that is there and weaves through everything. Magic and witchcraft is just the ability to tap into that flow of essence in the way that Jedi or wizards do in these systems. In the Owl House, the ability to use magic originally started as a very primitive connection between the Titan and the witch. This was before Emperor Balos came along and taught them the proper way to use it, and the old way became essentially wild magic. Now, most of the information for witches I'm going to be using for this video is what Ida explains about a witch's anatomy and the way they use magic in the first couple of episodes when trying to teach Luz. In her very first lesson, this conversation between Luz and Ida occurs.
Let me ask you, kid. Where do you think magic comes from?
From the heart?
Actually, you're right. No, really. It comes from a sack of magic bile attached to a witch's heart.
Oh, gross!
Witches have the ability to use themselves as a channel for magic because of the sac they have attached to them. Luz, obviously being human, doesn't have the ability to do this, but instead discovers a method through which she can use magic: external mediums. Magic in this world is harnessed through circles. Almost any and all magic we see used in the show is done using some kind of circle. There are some instances of magic being used without a casting circle, but there might be some reasoning for that, and I'll try and explain any of my theories for those in part 2.
It's beautiful.
So, overall, based on the canon, magic is a gift from the Titan that modern witches are able to channel through themselves using a magic sac that they have attached to their hearts and cast through the understanding of spells and the magic they're performing. Now, I'm going to dive into the speculation or inferences that I made based on the canon. Disclaimer, these are just my interpretations of what I've seen or what I've heard, and these are essentially the precursors to theories. This will basically be anything that I used to cover some of the continuity holes, which really there aren't many. Props to the show writers. It's going to cover mainly how magic is used or taught, and my own personal thoughts on certain parts of the canon that allow me to explain my theory easier. The first thing is going to essentially be the origins of magic on the Boiling Isles. As I mentioned, the Boiling Isles are literally just parts of a giant dead dude's skeleton. So I made the preconception that some giant beast died here and collapsed into the ocean, and as its body decayed, it gave way to both life and the presence of magic. The original witches were said to have practiced a different kind of magic than what is now considered a perverted or taboo form of magic on the Isles, commonly referred to again as wild magic. Likewise, when Luz shows other people her glyph magic, it's referred to as an ancient form of magic, or perhaps even a forgotten method of doing magic. It's essentially been rendered obsolete now. Based on the small information we have about witch anatomy, I'm going to make the inference that modern day witches came as a product of competitive survival based evolution. Doing glyph magic is inconvenient, can be very troublesome if you don't have the proper tools in hand, and leaves very room for improvisation in tight scenarios. Obviously, any witch that had the abilities to cast spells natively would have a higher chance of survival on the very treacherous Boiling Isles. It would become a socially favorable trait as well. Eventually, it would even become a norm in society. Obviously, in the show, there are some species and characters who can't or aren't seen casting spells. This could be from perhaps a lack of training or because they didn't evolve a magic sac that allows witches to cast their spells. For anyone familiar with the show Full Metal Alchemist, I think I can draw a good analogy here. Using alchemy requires a transmutation circle. Much like state alchemists, most witches in the Owl House use magic that is derived from circles. However, characters like Edward are able to channel alchemical powers through themselves and use themselves as the circles to transmute. I think this is equivalent to witches being able to manifest their own circles, which, as Ida explains, is the first step to casting a spell. Now, Luz, without this innate magical ability, is not able to follow Ida's guide. Instead, she figures out that circles themselves have inscriptions within them, and that I'm assuming is what aids witches in casting the proper spell. Putting the circles and the patterns together, Luz is able to rediscover glyph magic.
I know witches did magic differently in the past, but I never bothered to figure out how.
Ida!
So, for part 2, based on my own speculation and ideas, again, these are just my own thoughts, we can see that Luz is probably using some sort of ancient form of magic that she has learned and reintroduced back into the group. This is a type of magic that existed before Emperor Balos, and a type of magic that Emperor Balos has essentially eradicated. Now, if we keep this in mind, it's going to help part 3 make a lot more sense. Okay, with all this out of the way, we could finally delve into part 3, the part I'm assuming you even clicked for in the first place. So, what does any of these first two parts mean for the Boiling Isles? Well, let's talk about the Emperor. The Emperor rules the Isles with an iron fist in the name of prosperity and honor. He claims that the Isles do the Titan justice by following Belos's orders. He's a leader made from divine right. Seems like a great idea.
Listen, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
We, as the viewers, get a bit of a glimpse towards the end of the series that Belos's powers may not be exactly what he claims they are. He seeks control of all witches, especially those who stray from his coven system, propagating the idea that wild magic is inherently evil. This is pretty obviously shown to us since practically every other episode, Ida is always on the lookout for the Emperor and his guards. But she's always said that it's because he doesn't want her or her people to practice wild magic, and that he's scared of powerful witches. And while that's not inherently wrong, I think there's so much more to it than any of the characters realize. In episode 12, Adventures in the Elements, we get to take a closer look at how Ida connects with her magic, and the way she plans on teaching it to Luz. Ida always hated schooling systems and instead strengthened her skills through wild magic. This is in sharp contrast to many of Luz's friends, and the standard put in place by the Magic Society, learning through the discipline and through the books.
I know my lessons seem weird, but this is what wild magic is all about.
Making a connection with nature. The earliest witches understood that. Human witches need to understand it too. You want to learn a second spell?
With all my heart.
Then you have to learn from the island.
I'm speculating that as time went on, many witches began to rely more and more on their innate powers through the evolution and the rise of schooling, and that many aren't actually connected to the original magic and to the Titan, and their will for more magic, with the exception of a very few characters, like Ida and Luz. Ida is the most powerful witch on the Boiling Isles because she so strongly connects to the roots of magic, the island itself, who is, in turn, the Titan. Knowing that Luz's magic is the most primitive form of magic, as I've said, the ancient witches may have done glyph magic like Luz is doing now, this could be the original form, the first gift from the Titan. I wouldn't be surprised if we see sometime during Season 2, Luz creates a connection or finds some way to speak to the Titan, or at least what's left of it. Sort of the way that Belos claims he can actually speak to the Titan. My ultimate theory is that Belos is holding the Titan hostage. If we're to assume that the heart above him in the throne room belongs to the Titan, what's to say Belos isn't threatening the Titan's remaining life, remaining spirit, if he doesn't keep the Emperor as the strongest witch? In Season 2, I suspect Luz will try to bring his plan to a sore end. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave any comments or questions or even corrections because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I got wrong. Put it all down in the comment section below. Make sure to subscribe if you want to keep seeing videos and theories like this come up, and leave a suggestion for anything you'd like to see in the future. With that said, I'm Host, and we'll talk again soon.